to show you how to make a sweater where we're taking pixels and converting them to stitches. We're going to be designing type digitally and then converting that into a pattern to create type on the front of our sweater. So I've been working on the back panel. I'll go into details about this in a minute, but if you want to follow along, I'm just using weight 4 yarn and a 5mm hook. This is the Red Heart soft yarn if you want it to be exactly like mine, but feel free to use whatever yarn you have. I'm going to be making a navy sweater with cream type on it. So to start off, instead of just guessing, you probably have a crew neck, a sweater, even a t-shirt that you like the fit of. For this, I wanted to be a little bit more oversized, so I found a crew neck sweatshirt that kind of fits me in a way that I want to replicate with the sweater. And we're going to be using that kind of as a template for how big to make our sweater. And since we're starting with the back panel, you want to lay the sweater out in front of you with the back side facing up. And basically what I did is using half double crochets, I stitched the width of this crew neck, and then I stitched however many rows reached like the armpit line. So for me, I'll just fold it over. That was 75 stitches wide, and I did 40 rows. If I lay that out on this crew neck, I'm ignoring the ribbing for now, so if you want ribbing, start above that. I decided to cut in where my arms are going to be. So after I did 75 by 40 rows, I cut in 7 stitches, so I worked into the 8th stitch. And then I worked up 29 rows until I reached like the top shoulder seam. So here you can kind of see that better. And at the top, I came in 17 stitches just for 2 rows to build a little bit of roundness at the neck. And my goal is when I lay what I crocheted over my sweater template, it should be like a very close fit. This is what it looks like laid over my sweater. Once you complete the back panel, it's basically giving you a grid. And we're gonna take the grid, build it digitally, draw out the type, and then print that out and use that as a pattern to stitch later. So before we move on to the computer, count your rows, count your stitches, and figure out all the dimensions of your sweater. So mine was 75 on the bottom, I came up 40 rows, came in 7, went up 29, came in 17 for 2 rows, and repeated the same thing on the other side. But yeah, once you have all those measurements and you finished your back panel, grab your computer and let's get designing. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to mock up the type on your sweater in Illustrator, but if you don't have Illustrator, you can use Canva, you can do it by hand, but I encourage you just to watch the steps I go through to make sure that you're translating it in a similar way. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a new document. So the sweater back that we just created horizontally has stitches and vertically has rows. And the problem is the stitches are not perfectly square, but for designing purposes, I'm just gonna make them square. So I'm gonna create a document with a relatively small pixel size. This doesn't really matter right now because we're gonna change it later, but make sure you're at screen resolution, and then I'm just gonna make it 28 for now. I'm gonna call this Coziest Sweater, and it's gonna give you a square. But in Illustrator, there's like a hidden grid behind everything. We just have to toggle it on. So to toggle it on, I'm hitting on a Mac Command and then the apostrophe or quote key. And you'll see that there's this grid that they already make of squares. And you also want to make sure you go to View and then Snap to Grid. So what that's going to do is anytime you make something, it's going to automatically snap it to those grid lines instead of like just making it wherever. The only thing is you have to make sure you're not counting one square as 1 pixel. If you look over here, it says width 9 pixel and height 9 pixel. So we just have to keep in mind one of these squares is 9 by 9. The sweater that I made was 75 stitches by 69 stitches. I have my artboard selected here, and I'm gonna take the 9, and Illustrator can do math. I don't know if that's like a wide known fact, but anything in here you could say like 9 plus 7 and it will just do it for you. But since we want it to be 75 stitches wide, I'm gonna just multiply it by 75. So width, I'm gonna do 9, just the asterisk key, times 75 and hit enter. And that's gonna make 75 squares. And then the height, again, was 69, so I'm doing 9 times 69. And then I'm just gonna move around my artboard with the arrow keys to make sure it's really snapping to the grid here and it's not like weirdly offset like that. But now I need to cut out the sides where my armpits were cut out. So I'm gonna mark that off again by creating a square, and the width for me was 7 stitches, so I'm gonna do 9 times 7, and the height 29 rows. I'm going to times by 29. And then I'm going to align it so that it fits in this corner. And same thing on the other side, just copy that. For the neck, I came in 17 stitches and then I went down 2. And then this is going to be my actual neck part. And I'm going to make these gray just so that they blend in and I don't really notice them as part of the shape. So what I did to find like where I wanted the placement of the text is, even though this is the back, it's going to be like a similar shape. So I kind of held it up to me and like where the shoulder seams would go and everything. And if you want the type to be maybe like here, like centered on your chest, you can just put your finger where you want it to start and then count how many stitches that is. And same thing with the sides. You don't want the design to start right at the edge because it might get like swallowed a bit when you put your arms down. Maybe I want it to start here and then maybe I want it to come in like a little bit here as well. And then you can translate that digitally. So I wanted it 13 stitches down. So I'm going to times by 13 and I'm just going to put a guide here. And then from the bottom, I think I said 11. I don't know why. Just do whatever you want. And then on the sides, I'm going to count 6, put a guide, and same thing on the other side. Okay, so now what we're going to do, you basically are just going to be tracing your type with squares, like little pixels. And I know there are programs that will do this for you if you just like upload an image. But in my experience with those, you don't have as much control over, especially for type, like the legibility of it. It just kind of will like blur it and not necessarily have consistent shapes. So I just like that there's more control doing it this way. So for my sweater, I wanted to say Coziest. So I'm gonna find a font that I like. Okay, I like this font and it's a little thick, but that's okay. I'll just tweak it a little bit when I trace it. So the first thing I'm gonna do is create outlines. And I'm going to make sure that it's placed within my guides that I set up. This is a no-no in the design world, but I'm stretching the type. Sue me. I'm going to make it a light color and I lock it. And now what I'm going to do is take my cube, making sure it's black so you can see it better. So I've already done this. I'm just doing it again to show you guys, but I figured out that if I make the C only have 1 pixel in between, it's kind of hard to read once it translates to a stitch. So I think I'm making a rule for myself that I need at least 2 stitches between each color change. So 1, 2, 1, 2, and then 1, 2. And I'm just going to continue gauging this how I want. Okay, I like that as my C. And then again, following my rule that I made, I'm leaving the space between the C and the O to be 2 stitches, or pixels in this case. And thankfully the O is pretty similar, so I'm just gonna copy that. I'm skipping the Z for a second because the I is pretty similar. And something you can play around with is maybe all the letters you want to be the same width. So that these are 6 pixels. Maybe I want to say, you know, the I should be 6 pixels as well. But I'm going to go for a different look and make some of the letters, like the E, the T, and the I, just 4 pixels, because I think you still get enough information to read the letter that way, and it's not taking up too much width. Yeah, I'll do the T a little wider because I don't want it to read as an I. And then the E, and down. And then you can see the S is a pretty similar shape to the C, so I'm just going to copy that over here. Cool, I like that. Again, like, you don't need to follow this exactly because in real life you can't get this small of a space between there. And I also can't match this slope exactly. And I don't want it to look like too bulky in the middle. See how that adds a lot more bulk? So keep playing around with it and zooming out. Ignore the spacing of the letters for now. I'll fix it in a second, but I don't need this. The Z has a flat top and bottom. Back to geometry, the slope. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Maybe I'll do like 7. Come in a pixel. 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Come in a pixel and just fill this. Do it like that. It's better. I'm gonna make these a little bit longer though. Okay, so now I'm gonna move this out of the way, the thing that I traced. And I'm gonna make sure I listen to my rule, 2 squares between each letter, and just evenly space them. And then also make sure that it's centered. I like this. I think I'm gonna bring this up a little bit more, maybe 2 pixels. Also on the front, I'm gonna create a little bit more of a neck here. So I'm just gonna do maybe 2 more rows and then I'll round that off later. And yeah, now that I have my pixels how I like them, I'm gonna translate them to stitches. Let's start with row 1. Row 1, I am just chaining 75 chains. Why am I nervous? Also, I forgot to mention this, but I'm not counting my chains as my first row. The first row will be your first row of half double crochets. And don't forget, after you chain 75, chain 2 extra to use as a turning chain, and then you insert your hook into the 3rd chain from your hook. And continue on the row. My first 11 rows are just solid navy, so there's nothing fancy here. So I'll come back when I finish the bottom chunk, which would be 75 by 11. Okay, I just finished 11 rows and now I'm gonna show you how to change color. For my 12th row, I have 14 navy stitches still before I switch to cream. So I'm just gonna do those 14 stitches now. So as you can see here, I've done 13 stitches and I haven't done my 14th stitch yet. I'm gonna do the beginning of a half double crochet. So I'm yarning over, inserting my hook, pulling up a loop. And normally I would finish by yarning over and pulling through 3. But instead of pulling the navy yarn through, I'm gonna pull the cream yarn through, and that will be the start of my color change. And I pull that through my 14th stitch. I'm gonna carry the navy yarn and include it into my stitches. That just completed my 14th stitch, and now I have 4 cream stitches. So I'm gonna do those. And on my 4th stitch, I'm not finishing it. I'm gonna switch color. I pull that yarn forward and finish with my navy yarn. And now I have 4 navy stitches. Again, carrying cream yarn with the navy. And on my last stitch, I pull the navy forward, pull up the cream, and continue carrying my navy yarn for 4 more stitches. So far I've done 4 cream, I've done 4 navy, and I've done 4 cream again. Okay, that's a little bit easier to see. I'm gonna continue all the way through this row until I finish. And something you wanna keep in mind as you're working. So this row on the screen looks like I'm working left to right, but in reality, I'm working from right to left. So you just wanna make sure you're not reading the pattern like a book, left to right, left to right, left to right, that you're really paying attention to which side of your sweater is the front, and you're gonna be working kind of like a snake. Just to keep track of that, I'm gonna add a stitch marker to the front of my sweater. So since this is the C, this would read left to right. So this side would be the front. So I'm just gonna like loop it through any stitch, doesn't matter. Your yarn just will get tangled, so make sure every now and then you untwist them so that it doesn't become unmanageable. I'll check back with you in a bit once I get a decent amount of the color work done. I finished! This took so long and I'm so glad it's done. Our next task is to connect the front and back panels to kind of make like a sweater vest since we don't have sleeves yet. Okay, with all the color work that I did on the front, my tension is not perfect by any means. So it's not exactly the same width as the back. It's a little narrower because I pulled it like too tight in some areas. I'm gonna try using stitch markers to temporarily connect like the seams on the side and at the shoulders to see if it's gonna be wide enough in the waist and like the chest area. Let me do that and I'll try it on and show you my thought process. Here it is on. I don't know, I wish it was like a little wider here. I think instead of connecting these sides with just like a normal stitch, I'm gonna do like a single crochet or something just to add a little more width. Once I add ribbing down here, I'm hoping it'll kind of like help it be a little baggier, and I'm planning on blocking this. If you don't know what blocking is, you let it soak in water for a little bit and then you roll it out, lay it on a mat, and then like pin it and stretch it to be the size that you want. So I think when I do that, it'll make it a little bit bigger. But I do like this. I like navy on my skin tone, so definitely pick a color that you like on you. So I'm putting the right sides together so that the wrong sides are facing out. And I think first I'm gonna do the side panels. It doesn't really matter at all what you start with. So I'm starting in the bottom corner, making sure to insert my hook in the same stitch on both sides. And I'm joining my yarn. And I don't want this to come undone, so I'm just gonna tie a knot. And actually, before I start, I'm gonna add some stitch markers to make sure I am inserting it evenly and my ends don't end up like sewn together offset. I just finished sewing that side seam and I'm gonna tie off my yarn. And now they're connected. And I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side and on the shoulders, and I'll come back. I finished connecting front and back panels, and I turned it right side out so that you can see how it's connected. And now to make the sleeves, what we're going to be doing is working in rounds around the armholes. I'm probably going to connect my yarn down here where the seam is at. And the thing that you want to keep in mind is, since we're not working on top of the stitches like we normally would, we're working into the sides of the stitches. It can sometimes be unclear where to insert your hook, and that can cause a problem where both of the sleeves might end up with a different amount of stitches. When you do your first row, you really want to make sure you're counting how many stitches you're doing along the back panel and how many you're doing along the front panel, so you get a total number that you can easily replicate on the other sides. And I'm still just working half double crochets all the way around. And once I finish a full circle around the arm, I'm going to connect back to the first stitch I made with a slip stitch, and then chaining and continuing to work around. And I'll show you more of an up close view of that if you've never worked in the round before. So the first thing I'm doing is inserting my hook and joining my yarn. And then I'm working just half double crochets like normal into each stitch or open space. And it should start to look like this. And then once you reach the end of your row, you're going to want to insert your hook back into the first stitch to connect those stitches with a slip stitch. And then I'm chaining 2 and turning my work. Now that we turned our work, the first open space you're going to see is actually the slip stitch. So we're going to be skipping that and working into the first real stitch. And then I'm just again working normal half double crochets all the way around. When you get to the end of your row, connect with a slip stitch, chain 2, and turn your work. I wrote out all of the rows and what I did for decreasing. I realized this is very chaotic. I kind of just went with the flow. So if you've made sleeves before, or you just want to go straight down and decrease once you get to the wrist, that's totally fine, but this is just showing exactly what I did. Now for the sleeve ribbing, I did 1 row of plain double crochets. And once I got to the end, similar to what we did before, I'm just connecting back to the first stitch with a slip stitch, and then chaining 2 and turning my work. And then for the ribbing, the next 3 rows, I'm alternating between front post double crochets and back post double crochets. So you're going to be inserting your hook behind the double crochet post or in front of the post, just alternating all the way around. And here you can see what that looks like on the other sleeve. I just finished both of the sleeves, so here's what we're working with. As I just showed you, I added 4 rows of double crochet ribbing on the sleeves, and I'm going to use the same technique of ribbing for the collar and the waistband. And I'm not sure how many rows I'm going to do yet. I'm just going to play it by ear and keep trying it on and see what I like, especially for the collar. I don't want it to be too tight. I ended up adding 4 rows to the collar and 4 rows to the waist, just so that it would match the sleeves. And it ended up being the perfect amount. Now I have to weave in the ends. And then if you want to block your sweater, I'll show you how to do that. Hang with me, we're almost done. I weaved my ends and now I'm going to show you what you need if you want to block your sweater. For blocking, you're going to need something to submerge the sweater in, either a bucket or a tub would work. Obviously water, wool wash, or I've used hair conditioner before and it actually works pretty well. I just did like 2 pumps in a giant bucket, a few large towels, a foam mat, and then knit blockers or just regular sewing pins work fine as well. I'm in the basement right now, so sorry if this looks like really scary. The laundry is down here and it's raining outside, so I don't really have many options. I'm just gonna fill the bucket with like lukewarm water, and then it says to add a teaspoon per gallon of this wool wash, so I'm just gonna like eyeball it. I don't think it matters that much. And then I'll mix it around and submerge the sweater and leave it for about like 10 to 15 minutes. I just wrung all the water out of it. It's very heavy, so it's down here, but I just laid out a towel. I'm gonna lay out my sweater on top of it and roll the towel up and then step on it to squish all the water out. And I'm gonna do that about 3 times just to make sure it dries, to get as much water out as possible. And when you're squeezing the water out, don't wring it because it's not good for your sweater. I don't really know why. I just saw one time that you're not supposed to do it, so don't do that. But I was just like letting the weight of it drip the water out and squeezing it. It turned out perfectly and I'm so proud. I'm gonna try it on to show you what it looks like. If you remember when I tried this on earlier before I finished the sleeves, this part was like super stiff, but now that I blocked it, it has such a nice slouch to it. I've heard you're supposed to only block animal fibers, but this is acrylic and it had a nice transformation from the blocking, so I don't know. Thanks for sticking with me on this long process. If you want to see how I style this sweater, you should check out my TikTok, and I will see you very soon. Bye!